A good and warm welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining our session for today. My name is Jograj, and I'm going to be performing the presentation here with my colleague Jeff Giles. We'll be running through this presentation called for Accelerating and Demystifying the Delivery of Your Data Governance Practice Using Compass. So with that in mind, we've got a set of slides that we're just going to go and run through, and we will also have a quick demonstration which is going to be delivered by Jeff, and we will have a question and answer session also towards the end of the session. If you do have any questions that you need which are burning, please put them into the chat and we will do our best to answer those. If we think that they're going to take a little bit longer to answer, or maybe they're not quick and easy to answer, then we'll reserve those for later on. If we don't get time at the end, then we will follow up with the questions with yourselves on an individual basis. And just to let you know, the session is being recorded, so that if you do want to make reference or share it with any of your colleagues, then the link will be available after the session for you to download and use and distribute amongst yourselves. If you don't already know who Sandhill are, we are one of Quest's valued partners, and we've been working with them for the last 30 or so years. And obviously with Quest, they acquired the company called Irwin, and that's how our relationship has been with Irwin and Quest. And as the slide said, we have been supporting the Irwin set of products for data modeling and data governance for nearly the last 30 years. And obviously what Sandhill also brings to the table is it's got its own expertise and skills and knowledge, and we bring that along to the table as well when we're dealing with our clients. And so in that respect, we have a data modeling and data governance consultancy, and we have available people that are experienced in CMMI and DMM, etc. And of course, we will provide training and support as necessary. So with that, just as a general introduction to who we are, the first thing I wanted to do was to just poll a quick question for you, and our colleague Sophie will set up the poll for you, and we'll give you about 30 seconds to answer the poll, and then Sophie will present the answers back to us. So the idea of the poll is really just to get a bit of a quick feel for the thoughts of people in respect of the symptoms that people have experienced. Okay, so with that in mind, it looks like when we're looking at the questions, then it looks like that a lot of people are answering the fact that or there are some people in there that have experienced these questions and are finding some issues with some of the factors that have been indicated in there. And so what it's telling us is that if you've actually answered yes to any one of those questions or issues that you had in there, for those of you that have considered it, it's telling us that there are some symptoms in there which people will experience. And those issues are not simple issues to come and fix, and that the actual approach to trying to fix those issues is quite complex. And this slide here shows us all the sort of different components that need to be considered. And so simply data governance is very complex, and so it's not a surprise that some of you have found issues with that. And all of these issues that we've got here, they're all complex, they're interacting, dynamically moving. You will have lots of systems, processes, content, and lots of actors involved in there. And it's not, surprising too often that many of these data governance initiatives fail to deliver to the stakeholders' expectations and requirements. And those symptoms that we were talking about, they can arise because there's a lack of suitable data governance executors, the people actually run the show, the data governance program in there. There might be that you've got data governance initiatives that aren't driven by the business. They might be project-led or at a very low level in there. People might not know what they're supposed to be doing and who are responsible. That's assuming that there is some sort of data governance in practice. Obviously, there's a lack of transparency of the systems. What we don't want to do is to be the person who has the knowledge that everybody comes to. What happens if that particular person goes missing? There's a lack of transparency of the systems. So if we've got this complex set of intersections of people and processes and planning, how do we demystify all of these pieces in motion and get them coordinated and moving together? Yeah. So it's often been found that in a lot of the discussions that we've been having, especially with our clients, that people often look to some sort of technology, and they'll go along to acquiring a particular piece of technology, some sort of software that will help them to understand and create a data governance practice. But the problem with that approach is that it can be very, very limited to do that because of the lack of resources and proper planning in there. And what people often do is they get those tools, but those tools are not necessarily going to guide them along on the path. What they'll find is that there will be blanks in there, that you have. You don't necessarily know the steps, and it's like having the tool itself, but what are the steps? What's the process that you need to go through to follow in there? And so you can approach this where you're building your data governance from scratch, from a blank start, and you could obviously hire a consultant and get people involved to come in and do this, and do it on documents or Excel or even on Excel spreadsheets. Yeah. And that's the issue in there. There isn't necessarily any guidance, and obviously the consultant that comes in, they'll have their own particular approach that they've done that in the past. But what if, like Dorothy in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, you had your own yellow brick road to follow that would lead you to good outcomes? So what if you had something which enabled you to go along and do the planning and the activities which were required in the planning stage, in the implement stage, in the deployment and the monitoring stage in there? And this is where Compass as a tool comes into play. And it's of great value because what it's actually got in there is a pre-built data governance management system that provides you with a set of proven assets, templates, and processes that you can use to guide you through these various stages, in the planning and the implementing and the deployment stages, as well as obviously in the monitoring stages. And we can start with this, but what we're looking to achieve in using these technologies is that we're trying to achieve some particular business value outcomes. We're not just doing the data governance practice for no particular purpose. It is because there are some identified issues. And so what we're trying to do, for example, is to increase the data literacy, i.e. make more people aware of the data assets so that they can use them as part of their projects, reduce the risks associated with reduce the risk with any of your projects in there, make better use of the data that you've got, have the projects and the applications deliver to a better degree of confidence when you're working in there. And obviously you want to protect your intellectual property and knowledge and retain that internally in there. And of course the usual one that we also come across is that we want to ensure that we protect our data, and that's from accidental breaches or malicious intent of any of the users in there. So there's a lot of value that we're looking to achieve and protect by having these data governance practices and processes put into place. So with that in mind, Sophie, there's a second poll that I just wanted to ask, just to get a bit of a feedback from people in here. And the question really relates to, you know, have any of you really tried using any sort of metadata management tools to help you go along in this particular process? And so we'll just give about 30 seconds or so for people to respond to the questions in here. And once we've got that, then we will go along and see what the feedback is within there. So just a short wait for us. So again, we've got some feedback in here that a certain percentage of yourselves have tried using these data management tools. Now, the metadata management tools, you know, the fact that you're actually using some tools is good for you, but it's a case of actually making sure that you're using the right tool for the right purposes. Yeah. And in a lot of these instances, we've got these metadata management tools that are actually designed for handling the metadata, but not necessarily for establishing a data governance practice. Yeah. And that's really because those types of tools, they fit into the landscape in here. Well, they have their role in there in the respect that those products, such as the metadata management tools, they are designed to look at the life cycle of the products in there, to assign some responsibilities in there, to distribute some of the work activities in there, and to catalog the various assets in there. And data governance tools are slightly different in that they are at a very higher level intended to show what the mission is, what the charter is, what the actual processes are that are being followed in there. And so different tools do have different responsibilities and activities which they are responsible for, but it is the data governance tools which are intended to create and design the oversight of the data and the metadata. Yeah, and there is a degree of overlap in there, in that the data governance guides the management of the metadata and the metadata management tool. So that's why I put in there, you know, that there is some oversight of that data in there. And so they are intended to, or the data governance tools are intended there to provide the proper governance and managed according to agreed standards and criteria in that. And so this is where Compass comes in that it is intended to be a data governance capability, in that it provides not just a framework, but a complete capability to help you to jumpstart or even revitalize your data governance project and initiatives. So with that in mind, if we dive into this in a little bit more detail, so Compass as a product, that's the name of the product, is an automated data governance, knowledge and management system built to assist in the rapid deployment, operation and analysis of an organization's data governance program. Yeah. So it's really designed to accelerate your data governance establishment using a cloud-based template-driven framework that's guided by some industry standards, best practices, and processes, things like DMM and DCAM and DMBOK and etc. that I'm sure you have all come across. Now, Compass uses a centralized repository to store all of those data assets and provide them as a common resource for everybody to get and use as a single source of the truth. Yeah, and the intention there is that it's trying to demystify the steps of a data governance program. You know, earlier in my slides I was saying you can get a tool set and it's just blank, and where do you start, what do you do, what are the steps in there? The idea behind Compass is that it's not necessarily prescriptive, but it is saying there's a preferred or a recommended set of steps that you should be following in there. And out of the box, yes, you'll get a set of standard processes and templates that you can use, but you can customize those and implement it and deploy it according to your particular needs in there. And the idea behind having that template and the guides and the processes already in place is that it gives you a great big jump start. It accelerates the delivery of your data governance program. And of course, towards the end of the actual rollout of your data governance program, it sets in place the ability for you to monitor and control the effectiveness of your data governance practice by giving some statistics and management and performance metrics back in there. And so, the most crucial steps in this are establishing your data governance practice, is having these various capabilities they're provided for you. And by following the steps contained within Compass, both the executive and business and IT leaders, we're looking to help them to improve their data quality, achieve the business goals, and ultimately avoid any costs associated with any bad data, which is really what we're trying to do, is to eliminate bad data and bad usage of data. So what Compass provides for us is a framework, and in this framework, it organizes its content into a structure for organizing the data governance assets. Yeah. And its intention is that it provides for people to use a single set of rules, a single set of processes for how do you go about creating your assets, how do you go about collecting those, storing, what's their life cycle, and using these data governance assets. And because it's all sits in a centralized repository, it gives you the ability to go in and define what the business vocabulary is, the semantics, the business rules, policies, standards, etc., and to guide people as it is proceeding through in there. So let's have a quick look at some of these in here. Now, the user scenario that I've got in here is that we've got the Chief Data Officer. They've been asked to set up a new data governance program and to deliver a data governance practice. So quite a simple sort of user scenario in there. And so what we've got here are some suggested activities that can guide you through the various steps and activities that we need to do. And of course, this is all provided through Compass itself. So the first thing that a user in here, and when I say a user, in this instance, what we've got is the data governance program is kicked off by assigning a data governance lead administrator. And it's their responsibility to create a project plan. And what the project plan does, it says these are the activities, the start dates, the duration, and the various activities involved in actually establishing the data governance practice. And of course, Compass can be used to help you to create this project Gantt chart. But obviously, if you've got your own project management tools, you can use those as well. So the next step in here is that at this stage, what we need to do is to create the data governance authority. And this is the steering committee that comprises the high-level executives and stakeholders. And it's their intention to define what the direction, the mission, the charter, and all those things which guide and provide the executive oversight on what the program itself is going to be doing. Yeah. And so they need to be involved because they're giving you the guidance on the business strategy and how to handle any conflicts and resolutions, etc. in there. And of course, at this stage, Compass provides you with the templates and the guides that you require to develop those things, such as the charter and the mission and assigning the responsibilities in here. So the next step in this is to determine the data strategy. Yeah, so we've got the data governance authority set up, and now for our effective data governance team in the organization, the first step is to develop that data governance structure, the strategy in here. And the strategy is started by writing the data governance charter with the assistance of all the stakeholders who are involved in there. And again, at this stage, Compass gets involved or provides you with the templates and the guides that are required for developing those deliverables. So what are the inputs, what are the resources, what are the outputs you're going to get, and it defines those and provides you with the templates to deliver there. In the next step, what we have to do is to set up the data governance office itself, and that's the working group. And in here, the data governance lead enforces the policies which have been created by the by people in there. It's their responsibility to enforce these. and to coordinate between the different groups which are involved in here and are responsible for actually doing the work to define or rather it's moreover the data stewards, the data custodians, the data analysts are all involved in creating the assets that we want to try to monitor in the data governance office itself. And again, Compass provides the guidance on what to do and the templates to use to define the workings of the data governance office. So with that in mind, the data governance office, once that's been set up, they will go along and create the policies based on the program goals, which have been defined earlier. And so they can be involved in defining anything to do with the data, such as the naming rules, what's the security within there, what are the policies, the procedures that we're going to be following in here. And of course, the assets, because they sit within Compass, they remain a document, and we can update this and update all the assets in there as and when as we're going along. So if there's a change in the policy or the procedures or a change in the standards, we can go back into Compass and affect those changes in there. And of course, we also need, as part of this, especially if we're doing the actual data and trying to understand what the data is and the metadata, we need the assistance of skilled people. And these are going to be our data custodians. And what they do is they provide the bridge between the data governance team members and the things that the business, the enterprise uses and manages its data. And so what these data custodians are or must be capable of doing is to take those business models, the data models that you've got, your tables, your data structures, to be able to understand those and to make sure that those tables that are in place are understood with respect to their metadata definitions, and then what business policies and rules apply to those metadata definitions, and are they in compliance with them? And then also, if there's new projects, they need to be involved in there to make sure that those projects are being guided by these policies and rules that we've got in there. So again, the Compass comes into play in here because it provides the ability to define what the business is going to be handling in terms of the business glossaries, what it's going to be doing in terms of handling the metadata, and any data mappings and lineage definitions and mappings that we want to define. So again, the data custodians get involved at this stage as well. Now, obviously, if we've got a number of different actors and people who are involved in the various activities and the stages of defining the data governance program and the practice, we need to be able to go and define who those roles are, and also what they are allowed or should be doing at any one stage in the life cycle of those assets in there. And so we can define these RACI matrices, and these are a technique used to identify the responsibilities of those individuals and the definition of the deliverables or the inputs that they're going to be requiring in there. And I'm sure you've come across these RACI matrices before. And then finally, what we've got in here is the fact that there are workflows which we can define. And again, these are provided out of the box for you, where you can define a change management workflow or a data stewardship workflow. And these are implemented within Compass to help you to manage the policies, the procedures, the definitions of the assets, etc. And these can be added to, if required, and customized if you need to. But they are predefined workflows which are provided for people to manage the assets that you've got within your data governance program. And I was saying, finally, then, we want to know how we are progressing in our establishment of our data governance practice, and monitor the metrics and the assets that we've got and provide some feedback in here. And so we want to not only use this as a way of guiding other people and informing them, but also as a way of measuring how well our data governance program and practices is taking place in there. And so with that in mind, as a sort of general set of activities, that we can perform, I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, Jeff, and he's going to go through and give you a detailed demonstration of those various stages that I was showing you within the presentation that I've got in there. So with that in mind, Jeff, I'm going to make you the presenter, and then it'll be over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jog. Thank you for that wonderful and informing overview. So let me take a minute here and show my screen. What you're looking at here is the main entry point into Compass. Now, Compass itself is a cloud-based system, so it doesn't require anything on the user's computer except a browser. Everything is basically handled in the cloud. So there is security, so you have login, credentials, etc. I'm going to log in now into Compass, and you'll see the familiar framework. So as Jog mentioned, the information contained within Compass is organized into a framework that provides the structure for your data assets. And the way that this framework is essentially structured is there are 3 phases: the plan, the implement, and the deploy, as well as 9 different categories. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through a simple demonstration of these phases and categories. So if you read this from the left to the right, you're kind of progressing, starting with the data governance authority. So as Jog mentioned, one of the first things that you do is to establish some data governance authority. Now, every topical area starts with an overview, and the overview just gives you a general informational perspective to these functional areas which occur below. So in this functional area, the executive charter, which is one of the first things that you do, it is organized as a page. And if you look closely, each page itself has these disclosure triangles. So I can collapse up the page to showing just the information I want to visualize. And you'll notice that this structure will remain consistent across all of the pages that we look at. And it helps you in getting oriented to how the system works. It also helps with training for people that might want to use the system to understand something. So let's start with this idea of context. If I expand that, you can see that starts with a purpose, sets the scope. I've got my directives, my guidance for that. If I go into the description, I can see the diagram here, which is a context diagram, which essentially shows you what the inputs are and the execution process, as well as what the outputs are. In this case, the executive charter, which should contain information about missions and scope, accountability, authority, RACI, etc. So we understand what the outcome's going to be after we execute this. And down here, you'll see some items in red, which are simply cross-references to other places within Compass that further define these kinds of things in here. And each one of these boxes here has got its own table, which describes what that particular item is that's being applied to the charter. Now, there's an area in here called appendix, and what this area does is it allows you to append your own documents. So if you, let's say, have a charter already and you want to associate that charter with this page, you can do that. You can also use sample content that we have here, where it's simply a boilerplate of a charter that you can further define. And we also have a completely blank, empty charter, which just basically has the headings that you can also use and fill out. So when we say it's sort of a jumpstart idea, what we're more or less saying is we're giving you some basic information that's going to allow you to start building your data governance program. Moving on from the charter, the mission and scope is where we actually define some of the strategies. So you notice that one of the things that was a requirement for the charter was to define what the mission and scope is. So again, you'll notice that the page structure is essentially the same. We have a similar context diagram, some guidance, some directives around how you might want to approach this. So all this information is here within the Compass page. Back out here to the authority, when we talk about accountability, Jog mentioned the RACI idea. So that's defined here in DG accountability, where we take a look at what exactly is meant by RACI, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. So an overview of what is meant by accountability in terms of data governance. And lastly, if I look at this architectural environment, now one of the things that people generally do is when they're tasked with building a data governance program, they will just go out and buy some data governance technology. But as Jog mentioned, when you buy the data governance technology, it's essentially a blank slate. There is no information that's pre-populated in there. You have to actually provide that. And in the data governance architecture here, we talk about some of the things that you may need to have for a data governance technology infrastructure. And what this helps you do is right-size your data governance technology. Sometimes people can get away with simply using Microsoft Office for a while, and it works pretty well for their data governance efforts. But then at some point you outgrow that and you want to move to something a little bit more robust, like Irwin's Data Intelligence Suite. That helps you sort of get the requirements down so that when you do actually have to buy some technology to support your data governance, you can right size it to have just the right amount of technology that you need. Now, once you've set up your data governance authority, they are responsible for authoring the policies and standards that you may need to do data governance. So we take a look at the next section here, which is data governance policy and standards. Now, in this list here, we have a number of different policies. A lot of these policies are what we would call fundamental policies. That is, it doesn't matter if you're an organization that, let's say, manufactures products, or you're in healthcare, or you're in finance. Generally, you're going to want to have policies around data security, data integration, how do we manage change? So these are functional policies that are at the fundamental level. So let's investigate one of these so that you can see what's in here. There's one here called Business Term Management Policy. So we know that we need to understand the definitions of these business terms. That gives us insight as to what the data means. So when we look at this, we're looking again at the purpose, the scope, but down here, some processes that we might want to have in place. So when we talk about a policy, what we're really talking about is some sort of what we would call directives about what we need to do, but policies themselves don't actually tell you how to do it. So in this case, we're just looking at some of the ideas and guidance around developing a policy that has to do with managing a business term. Now, once you have identified the policy, then you can go ahead and start looking at the standards that help enforce the policy. So a standard itself is simply saying, well, okay, we have a policy that tells us that we need to manage our business terms, but I'm not exactly sure what is a good business term definition. I need some guidance on that. So the standard simply says that, okay, if you're going to look at a business term, you can look at it for various characteristics, such uniqueness, completeness, validity. So these are the things that I would want to look at my business term and make sure that it meets certain criteria. And those criteria are further defined down here. So the standard itself just reinforces the policy that we've established around business terms and managing the business terms. So next thing we're going to do here is we're just going to take a look at jumping over into the next phase. So if I jump back to the home page here, I can see that at the implement phase here, we're talking about at this point the actual procedures and processes that actually make our authority and policy and standards work. So these are basically the working processes around the plan. So when I go into governance management, again, the same thing here, consistently, there's an overview of what is meant by governance management. And then we talk about things like stewardship, which is just a fundamental thing that we do here in inside of our data governance processes. So we want to essentially understand what are the different processes here. So these things are basically, what are the work cycles? So if I look at data stewardship, here again, I have the details around the context, but here my description gives me the functional overview of how stewardship works. And again, each of the things that I'm talking about here is completely customizable, so you can edit any of the things that I'm talking about here. But if I scroll down here a little bit further, you can see that there's a RACI matrix. Now, we know from the planning stage that we need to establish some sort of accountability, and RACI is just one way to do it. But if we look across the top, these are all the different roles that would be involved in a data governance program. Now, you can change any of these role names to be anything that you'd like, but essentially they cover the stewardship from a business perspective, such as business terms and definitions, as well as custodial type things, which are more technical in nature, such as, you know, what is the abbreviation of that particular thing, and what are the data types and various other things that technical people would be looking at, as well as looking at content for data quality, as well as life cycle. How much data do we keep? How long do we keep it for? When do we retire it, etc. Now, the stewardship process is based on making sure that things have been reviewed and they meet the standards. So we looked at the standards, we looked at the policies. Now we're just looking at essentially what you would go through to ensure that something is compliant. So we had looked at the business term and that there was a certain standard that need to be met for a business term in order to be accepted. But these are the actual steps that you would go through, and which role is the accountable role, which role is the responsible role, the informed role, the consulted role. And then further down here, we can see that there's a sort of a swim lane model here, which essentially says that something is submitted. So let's say in this case, a business term for evaluation. Somebody looks at it, they make some decisions about it, and then it will move through a workflow process to reach a certain point of compliance. So it's either accepted or it's not accepted. If it's not accepted, it needs to run through the process again until it reaches the point where it becomes accepted, and then it's now part of the business glossary. So the stewardship part here helps us understand what we need to do and how we need to get it done within the context of data governance. So let's take a step back out here and let's take a look at our idea of how conflict and issue resolution might be managed. So again, we need to understand that if there is a conflict, how do we resolve that? What is the escalation procedure for moving something up if we can't agree that that particular business term definition meets the standard? somebody else at a higher level needs to understand how that is going to work. So again, these are the things that need to be in place when we start looking at these things. Now, let me jump out here to looking at metadata management. Jog touched on this a little bit before, which is really the technical part of doing data governance, where we need to understand that there are certain, let's say, columns in a database, tables in a database, XML schemas, big data schemas, et cetera. How do we manage the naming standards for these kinds of things? Some people have adopted the ISO standard of 11179 series of metadata management standards, but essentially this talks about the fact that you need to have a standard. There must be processes in place that talk about how you manage the metadata. So that's the place where we basically take the plans and we turn them into actionable work within data governance. And now the deployment. So the deployment, we start to talk about things like a roadmap. So in this case, we're looking at a rollout schedule, deploying communications. One of the fundamental tenets of data governance is, how are we going to communicate change to people? How do people know what's going on? You also need to be able to train people on governance as well, because we can't assume that everybody who's doing data governance understands what data governance is. So we have some mechanism for that. And lastly, technology deployment. Now, we put this thing towards the end because what we understand is that sometimes people overbuy on technology. They'll buy a big data governance management or data cataloging system, but they're only going to use a small portion of it. Or they think they can get by with using Excel and PowerPoints, but quickly find out that, no, that's probably not going to be enough. So we leave this part to the end so that people understand that technology is one of those things that you have to have, because it does get quite cumbersome to manage all the interactions, as Jog talked about, those little hexagons talking to other hexagons. But data governance itself is not a technology solution. So if I come back out here to the home page again, down here towards the bottom, this is part of that communications plan where I can look at this and see what's going on in my data governance program. The other thing that I want to take a look at is understanding that entire project for the rollout. So here's an example of that Gantt chart that Jog showed earlier. Now, if I expand this out, I can see that there's certain names here. I can also start to collapse this up. So if I start to collapse this project up, we can see that it comes back to the plan, implement, and deploy. And that if I expand the plan, then here's the area where I establish the data governance authority. There are little zoom in and zoom out controls here. I can zoom this to fit, and then it will shrink things down so that I understand essentially what I need to do and in what order it can be done. This is, of course, completely customizable by you. You may have some of these things already in place, which is why you might want to do an assessment of where your current state of data governance is. Oftentimes there's little pockets of data governance that are happening, but you just don't know they're happening until you begin an assessment and find out that somebody has a small, let's say, a business glossary somewhere. The other thing that Jog talked about was this idea of ongoing sustainable efforts in data governance. And that's when you want to start talking about things like understanding how we're doing from a performance perspective. So if we know that we have a certain number of business terms, how many of those terms have been approved? How long does it take between the time a business term is submitted for approval and its actual approval? How many technical assets have been looked at? how many things needed to get escalated up in order to be resolved. So these are the dashboards that you can use to help understand governance. Obviously, there's plenty of dashboards for things like data quality, and data quality dashboards are well known, but there isn't a lot of information on data governance dashboards. That is, how well is my data governance program going? So these things are completely customizable by you. You can create your own metrics. When you roll over a metric, it will actually display information about it. So you can customize these things to give you what kind of governance information you want. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it back over to Jog, and we will address any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. And I hope everybody saw a good overview in detail of the capabilities of Compass in there in that demonstration. So the next section that I wanted to just briefly move over to was really an issue that sort of pops up with people quite a lot, because people are always concerned about, well, how much is this going to cost, and what's the initial outlay, and what's the investment? When can I see my return on my investment, etc. And what we have found, and obviously we've been speaking with lots of people who've been doing data governance and implementing data governance practices, and we all appreciate it's not an easy task. And what we have found is that, don't take this as a literal values that I'm showing in here, but sort of like indicative indications of.
Jog, sorry to interrupt you. You need to present your screen.
Sorry?
We can't see your screen at the moment.
Oh, right.
Oh,
sorry.
I haven't started sharing. I stopped sharing. My apologies for not letting you know that you needed to start showing yours.
Right. Sorry. Thank you for that. And right. Now we've got a technical problem. Where is?
There's a button that says show.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah. There we are. It wasn't present there. So now let me do that. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
My screen now. Sorry.
We can see the screen. My apologies, John.
Sure. Thank you. So what I was saying is that obviously, people are very interested in knowing what the sort of likely costs are involved in doing or using Compass. And so the costs that we've got here are sort of indicative, they are not, absolute and final in here. But in our discussions, what we have found with people is that typically, these sort of data governance programs take, to set up can take many months, if not years, to actually roll out. There's a number of different participants that are involved in there, and the time to set this up and start reaping any returns on your investment in there can be protracted in there. And so what this is trying to do is to say, well, as an approximate figure, you could be talking something like about $260,000 in here to build this up, and something like 4 or more team members in here to set all of this up. And so what Compass is trying to do is to bring that forward and say, because there's already the templates in here, because there's already the processes, there's already a suggested set of steps that you can follow through in here, the actual time taken to implement this and start gaining the returns on your investments in here is smaller and earlier within the life cycle of setting up your practice in there. But this is only a quick question, obviously, just to give you a little bit of a feeling for the likely cost that may be involved in here. And obviously, if you want to discuss this in more detail, then please do contact us and we can talk specifics about your setup and your requirements in there. And so with that in mind, there was just a couple of wrap-up slides that we've got. So remember, the idea in here is that the Compass is designed to help you to demystify the steps of your data governance program, because it provides you with the existing templates in there, the processes that you can follow within there. And because those templates and processes and functionality already exists in there, it accelerates the delivery of your data governance program. You know, it reduces the time, the cost. There's also the content in there, and obviously it's fairly easy to use in there. The fact that you've got a centralized repository of the content makes it visible. Yeah, you can encourage collaboration in there, make that available to your broader audiences in there, share the content in there, and help to promote your data governance program in there. And obviously, if people have clear understanding of what they're supposed to be doing, who they're supposed to be going to visit, who has ownership, who has stewardship, the demarcation or the demarcation lines of responsibilities are clearly spelled out, and so people know what they're supposed to be doing within there. And overall, the intention in all of this is to raise the quality of any of your data-led initiatives, you know, whether they are projects, upgrades, migrations, business intelligence reports, development of new applications, etc. Then you stand a much better chance of delivering something in there if the quality of the data and the data assets that you've got in there is much greater in there. So with that in mind, we've got maybe about 9 minutes or so to ask any questions. And obviously, whilst you're thinking about your questions, there have been some questions which have already been raised in the chat sections in there. So whilst you're thinking about your questions, maybe we'll take some of the questions that have already been raised within there. And I think there's one in there which talks about integration with other vendor systems. So whilst you're thinking about your question, let's take that particular question itself. So what I wanted to point out in here is, you might remember when I was showing you the slides earlier, there was a set of slides in here where we were talking about the integration between the different tools in here. And so what you've got to remember is Compass is not a product which is designed to integrate or scan for metadata. Compass, the idea behind Compass is to provide you with the guidance to define what your data governance program is going to be doing, and the policies, the processes, the procedures, the standards, the responsibilities of who is doing what. It is down to your other techniques and your other tools, like your metadata management tools, to actually do the automated scanning of your metadata, to do the scanning and importing and the data cataloging of your assets. And the point of overlap between these two is that what Compass provides you with is, it says that here is the oversight that we are going to be providing to you when you are harvesting your metadata assets. Yeah. So your data governance authorities will define what are the business terms, what information do you want to collect for your data catalog, what are the attributes that you want to collect. You know, you might be interested in sensitive personal information, or there might be ownership issues that you've got and sharing issues, and you can flag those up and say, yes, this is what we want to know. And it is the data governance, i.e. Compass's responsibility to define what those attributes are, but the actual execution and the gathering and the creation of the metadata itself is down in here within the metadata management technology tools. So I hope that sort of made that clearer. Sorry, I heard some noise. Was
Oh, that's just me, Jug. Just looking for the right moment to interrupt you. Just on the technical side of things, a lot of the data cataloging tools have a web-based front end to them, and what they allow you to do is to embed a hyperlink within their text that will reference Compass. So you could have in the body of your metadata management technology a cross-reference back to Compass, which might display, let's say, the standard for you managing a certain piece of metadata, right? So it could be business metadata, could be technical metadata, but data governance could provide that kind of oversight, because as Jog mentioned, the Compass part is essentially instructing of what you need to do, but it doesn't tell you exactly how you should do it. And sometimes the technology itself might have some baked-in mechanism for going through something. So that's why Compass is sort of agnostic in that respect, and it just sort of informs you because a lot of the feedback that we've got is I just bought a certain data cataloging tool and I installed it and I got it ready, and now everybody has access to it. They can see it, and now I'm getting bombarded with emails about, well, what do I do now? I know I have access to it, but what should I be doing? So that's kind of where Compass sort of comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to finish off on that question there, so it is the metadata management tools, that you would use to connect into your data warehouse, CRM, ERP systems, and to be able to do the scanning within there. And obviously, when you're scanning the metadata in there, you can either do that on a one-off basis, or you can schedule your metadata scans in there. And once you've identified what the metadata is supposed to be doing, or what the metadata is, and you've got an understanding of it, then you can start looking to see, well, actually, have I got duplicate databases? Have I got duplicate metadata? Are they the same things? And use the cataloging and the reporting facilities within here to enable you to simplify, rationalize, make sense of the content that you've got in there. And the other thing, obviously, which these metadata management tools can do is also to look at data mappings and your data lineage. And obviously, again, you can only really understand what your data mappings and your lineage is if in the first place you understand what the actual metadata itself is. So once you've got a catalog of those assets, that's where you can really start coming in and using that in there. So those were a couple of the questions in there. Some of the other questions that we've got don't really sort of, they're sort of more administrative about the availability of the slides and the availability of the slides and the recordings in there. We'll answer those automatically afterwards in there. And a final question that comes up is, well, why have you actually built up Compass? Why are you doing it? What's the issue with it? Maybe Jeff or Robert, do you want to answer that particular question?
Sure. One of the main reasons why Compass came about is in our consultancy, around metadata management and governance, we came across customers that were asking us questions about governing of metadata. For instance, doing data models. We sell data modeling tools, but the questions would come up like, well, how should I abbreviate names? Or how do I do a data model review, which are really just governance concepts. And then that led on to a bigger concept around data governance, because data governance is really the central oversight of lots of different data management activities like data quality and data architecture and all the other things. So it touches a lot of those different things. And so we started looking at this idea of, when we look at data governance, there were some things, some themes that just kept repeating over and over again, such as you should know who is responsible for what data. We should have information around what are the policies, what are the standards and things like that that we need to implement certain things. So those themes kept coming up, and we thought, well, what if we took a lot of those themes and we created a baseline for governance? Not to say that this one thing would fit everybody's instance, but that at a base level, it should be a jump start to getting a data governance program off the ground, which is sometimes the hardest part. So that's essentially how it came about.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Jeff. Now I notice that we have actually approached the end of the session here. We've just got a minute or so left, and any of the remaining questions that we've got, we'll answer those directly with the participants that have posed those questions. And as a wrapping up here, if you want to know any more, you want to discuss any of the issues that we've raised or any of the things that you've seen on here, and you want to find out more, then you can contact us on any one of these links that have been provided in here. And we'll see, considering the information that we've presented you with, I would like to just take this final opportunity to thank you for your time. And as we were saying, the presentation and the slides will be available after the session. And we thank you for your time and look forward to speaking with you shortly. Thank you very much.